Okay, so I want to just introduce a kind of a concept that's obviously important for drugs and the brain, areas of the brain that are involved in emotional experience and expression. And actually, there's a famous neurologist named Paul Broca who, basically his name, affixes to that left hemisphere region of the frontal lobe that's involved in sort of planning what it is you're going to express in terms of language. It's a component of a more distributed network in the frontal lobe that helps you to prepare your utterance, whether you speak it or sign it or write it, known as Broca's area. However, Broca is also known for looking inside, the middle of the brain here and saying, look at all this cortex, look at all this stuff that's kind of hidden in the midline. There's a great big fissure that separates the left and the right hemisphere, right? And it's called the longitudinal fissure. And you can put your finger down quite a ways until you hit the corpus callosum, right? That's that band of white matter connecting the two, hemispheres of the brain. And so he actually referred to this region around here as the limbic lobe, because limbus is Latin for border, and these were the areas that were bordering that corpus callosum. And it turns out that, there's another famous kind of neurologist named James Papes, who in the 1930s, was studying rabies and, sort of the emotional consequences of, infection by the rabies organism. And there was significant degeneration in this region around here. So these areas became sort of associated with aspects of our emotional experience and expression, and they're certainly going to be impacted by drugs. And we now call sort of the limbic system, or many people refer to as the limbic system, is several interconnected cortical and subcortical structures. So some of the cortical structures include, for example, that cingulate gyrus. Remember the cingulate gyrus, the anterior cingulate, is receiving input via the thalamus from the hypothalamus. So this is information, about the internal milieu, how thirsty you are, how hungry you are, how horny you are. All those aspects are going to be communicated, detected by, how stressed you are, by hypothalamus, and then, projected via the thalamus into the anterior cingulate, and it can influence, obviously, your behavior and your thoughts and what you dwell on, etc. So that cingulate gyrus is definitely a component. Also, memory plays a pretty significant role in emotional experience and expression. So that medial temporal region here, which is known as, has an important structure known as the hippocampus. And here let's pull this up. I'm going to take off the cerebellum, right? And then we can pull down the temporal lobe here. So here is it from the sides. I'm separating it this way, right? And then you can see in here, there's this, what they refer to as a sort of a seahorse-shaped structure along here. This is an old area of cortex. It's called paleocortical. It doesn't have as many layers as neocortex and neocortex, but it's considered to be cortical. The hippocampus is also critically involved in kind of emotional experience and expression, and it's an important component, basically, of the limbic system. The hypothalamus, the drive generator, is also considered a pretty significant component of the limbic system. And so are components of the basal ganglia, particularly a structure that's embedded here in the frontal lobe, a nucleus that we'll talk about called the nucleus accumbens. And it's sort of like as the caudate nucleus and the putamen components of the basal ganglia sort of come together, they fuse towards the front, in this structure that's called the nucleus accumbens. There are other areas too. There's a very important nucleus that's actually embedded in the temporal lobe here, in the more anterior portion of the temporal lobe, that's just in front of the hippocampus, the area that's so important for memory. This is called the amygdala. It's an almond-shaped nucleus, and it seems to be particularly responsive to stimuli that provoke powerful arousal or emotional responses. Often those that are associated with threat, for example. So the amygdala is very well positioned to, receive lots of information, like from your eyes, your ears, your body, etc. Also from the frontal lobe, your thoughts about consequences, etc. And it has a lot of outputs as well, including direct autonomic output, kind of like the hypothalamus. It can, generate a fight or flight response. It can, stimulate nuclei in the brainstem that generate fear expressions or, postural changes that are associated with fear. It also can, activate a stress response from the hypothalamus, right? So the amygdala is very well positioned to respond to a stimulus that has a powerful kind of emotional impact with all these sudden changes in your body. So all of these structures kind of collectively comprise what we call the limbic system, and clearly they're going